Hi. Over the next while, we'll be discussing one of my writings, which is about why, first of all, why I write about wisdom, and second of all, why people would consider pursuing wisdom. Now, in the Romanian version of this video, I said this would be a summary. Turned out it wasn't a summary. It was like a full-blown discussion about the topic. So that's what this is gonna be. The topic, like I said, is wisdom and why I write about it and why I think it's worth pursuing. And we'll be discussing that. I'll be going over what I wrote on Medium. So this video is meant as a complementary material to what I wrote, and it's going to contain mostly the same subjects, maybe presented a little bit differently. Now, as in any endeavor, I think it's important to start with why you're doing what you're doing. That's like the foundation on which to build your actions. Because otherwise, even if you're doing the right things, if you're doing them for the wrong reasons, they're the wrong things to do. So I'll start with why I seek wisdom and why I decided to write about wisdom. And this is not really like a very specific answer, more like a general approach I have. And that is that for me, wisdom is in a very literal sense, like having a sister who gets me out of trouble all the time. Of course, wisdom is a virtue, right? She's not like a person with a megaphone yelling at you on the streets, even though we have Bible verses that more or less say that. But the approach, the attitude I have towards her, it's something like that familiarity. Like she's actually a sister that I have, that I care about, that I wish well, and whom I try to listen to as best as I can. So that's my personal reason for why I seek wisdom. I really do see her as sort of a family member. And there's a verse in the Bible about Solomon seeking wisdom. He at one point said that he shares her gladly, and I think that's an important attitude to have. Wisdom isn't something that you have just for yourself. It's something to be shared with others, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a bit. Now, why would anyone in general maybe seek wisdom? Well, we all sort of have this implicit notion about what wisdom is, and we have this idea that wisdom is sort of what helps you make those decisions that help you live the life worth living, right? And I mean, if you're someone who's considering seeking wisdom, maybe it's because in some sort of way you're acting foolishly, as all of us are in small and in important ways. And maybe you have some trouble that you're dealing with, or not so much dealing with as you have problems that keep on occurring, and you keep hitting your head against that same problem over and over again. Or maybe you're looking for some psychological resources for when life seems sort of stacked up against you, those bad days when everything seems to go wrong. It's helpful to have a resource like wisdom to help you through that difficult and trying moment, or trying day, let's say, or series of days, or whoever knows how long you're in that trouble for. Or maybe you're just curious and you're sort of interested in what wisdom has to offer, and you're considering maybe putting in the work to become wiser. Or maybe you just want to see what this whole deal is about. Whatever your reason for being here is, and for considering wisdom, those might be a few reasons to start pursuing wisdom further. They're not really like very specific life situations or anything like that. They're meant to be general sort of troubles that we're having, or difficulties or challenges that we're facing, that would be amenable to wisdom. And my proposition is that all of these things are in some way or another, we can be guided through our problems, through our curiosities, through um, our openness, let's say, to learn new things by wisdom. So that would be like a very short introduction to why anyone would be interested in wisdom. Now, what I'm trying to do in my Medium article, which is what this video is based on, is I'm trying to explain why wisdom is worth seeking, not so much through giving you reasons for why wisdom is important, but rather through trying to explain what wisdom is and hoping that resonates with something within yourself and that makes you maybe want to learn more or apply more from what I write and what you find elsewhere. And with that in mind, this article is going to be structured in two parts. The first part is going to be the psychological approach to wisdom, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about the approaches, the theories that we have. It's a mostly theoretical field, the psychology of wisdom, and I'm going to try in this article to synthesize some of the knowledge that we have there. And then the second part is going to be for the more religiously and spiritually minded people, and this is going to be about the religious and mystical approach to wisdom. And that's going to be, at least for me, it's an interesting discussion because it delves into the more nuanced attitudes that we might have towards wisdom. But let's start with the more concrete, let's say, even though it's theoretical, let's start with the more concrete approach of psychology. Now, the thing about the literature on wisdom in general is that psychologists have been studying it for not that long, actually. Well, it depends on who you ask. Like if you look at, for example, Jung, he's one of the earlier, let's say, researchers into wisdom. Even though he doesn't explicitly look at wisdom, he has this whole concept of the anima and the animus. These are the symbolic representations of our souls, and the later stages of development for the anima and the animus are embodied by wisdom. But going into more recent times, and this is where the domain of wisdom in psychology has sort of flourished a little bit more, we have a couple of theories, and each researcher that decided to study this field decided it would be a good idea to have his own theory. So everyone's sort of, it's like that story, you might know this one. It's from the Hindus. They have this story of a king who at one point summoned to his court a bunch of blind men, and he put in the courtyard an elephant, and he asked those blind men to touch the elephant and describe the being. And each blind man touched a different part of the elephant. One maybe touched the legs, the other one maybe touched the what do you call it? The elephant's trunk or the ears, and so on and so forth. And each of them gave different descriptions based on what they touched. And researchers in psychology, in the psychology of wisdom, sort of did the same thing. They looked at different aspects of wisdom and said, this is wisdom, no, this is wisdom, no, this is wisdom. And they're all a little bit right and they're all a little bit wrong. The truth isn't really with any one of them. It's more, if you take an aerial view of the theories we have, you sort of get a better idea of what wisdom is from the point of psychology, from the viewpoint of psychology. That being said, what I'm going to try to do is sort of piece things together into something that has a little bit of coherence. And I'm not claiming at all that this is sort of a comprehensive analysis of the literature. I'm doing that for my dissertation, but that's a separate topic altogether. What I'm trying to do here is give you a starting point so that we know, we have more or less a common understanding of what we're talking about. One of the more prosperous and well-researched theories of wisdom is proposed by a bunch of German psychologists from the 90s. They were interested in the developmental aspects of wisdom. They're developmental psychologists. That means they're interested in how people age, how people's psychology changes across our lifespan. And they were interested particularly if there are any positive things about growing old, because we tend to see growing old as sort of associated with a bunch of problems. You're maybe a little bit more rigid in your thinking. It's a little bit harder to remember things. And they found that wisdom is actually one of those aspects that sort of tends to increase as we get older. Though, as literature says, it's not necessarily the case that old people are necessarily wise. It's more that they have more life experience to draw upon. But with that in mind, they formulated a theory. It's called the Berlin Wisdom Paradigm. And their proposal is that wisdom, in a very technical sort of definition, wisdom is a system of expertise in the fundamental pragmatics of life. Now, what that means for us more, let's say, laymen, is that wise people are experts in what it means to live life. That makes a little bit more sense, I feel. And they propose that this expertise in life is sort of based on a couple of things. One is knowledge. And this knowledge is in two parts. One is procedural knowledge about life, so sort of knowing how to live life in such a way as to live that life worth living. And then we have also declarative knowledge about life, so knowing what life is in general terms. And then they go on to say there's a couple of more elements. There's like 5. I don't remember all of them, but there's just the 2 types of knowledge are 2 of them. There's also being tolerant and understanding that there are differences in values that people have in life. So maybe for me, an important aspect of my life would be family, having a family life and working towards having that family life. But maybe for someone else, the number 1 spot is taken by, I don't know, career, building up something that gives the world something that they need, a service or a product or, I don't know, a book or what have you. So it's a sort of a difference in conceptions about what's important about life that we tend to have individually and interindividually, I should say. And the idea is to be able to tolerate that relativity of values. It isn't necessarily that there's a clear-cut answer for how each one of us should live life. There's more general answers, and we see that in religion and in the sort of attitudes they inspire. But it doesn't tell you, even in religion, you don't get told, well, tomorrow you should decide to apply for that university, right? That's sort of a decision that's left up to you. Or tomorrow you should decide to ask that girl or that guy out. That's again a decision that's left up to you. And being able to tolerate that difference in value, that someone might choose to apply for a university, someone else might in that day apply, let's say, to ask out someone. That's an important aspect of wisdom according to this Berlin wisdom paradigm. There's also being able to tolerate uncertainty in general in life. So if you're studying in school, you tend to get sort of specific problems, like in your math class. You don't get this vague sort of problem. You get very specific information about what the problem is and what answer you're supposed to arrive at. Prove this theory or find X for some equation. But life isn't like that, right? We have a lot of uncertainty in life. We have problems for which we don't really have answers. For example, right now I'm faced with a problem regarding applying for clinical psychology. that's an investment. As I just found out today, that's a 2-year investment, and I'm gonna have to pay for that, literally with money for the supervision, and it's something that doesn't really have a clear answer. Like, is how do you handle that? In how do you save up? Do you save up? It's a My point is there's a bunch of uncertainty to life, and you need to be able to tolerate that. Now, one thing that these psychologists that formulated the Berlin wisdom paradigm did is in my opinion, they formulated it with a rather narrow view in mind. So they said wisdom is being an expert at life, and that's it. And that sort of led to some methodological mishaps, because when they said that, it's sort of like it's all on you in a way. And if you have knowledge about life in general, maybe you don't have so much knowledge about how to apply that general knowledge to your own life. Or maybe you have the reverse situation where you know what to do for yourself, but it's very hard to give advice to someone else facing similar trouble. And as you might expect, that led to different theories emerging. And there's a complementary theory that says, well, no, wisdom isn't just this sort of expertise system, because it's also important whether you can apply that wisdom in your own life or you can apply it in someone else's life as well. So to give an example, you can be someone who people rely on for dating advice, and you haven't been in a relationship for years. I mean, probably some of us know someone like that if we're not in that situation ourselves. Or vice versa, we have people who seem to be living rather well, but when they're asked what other people can do to sort of live well as well, they give this advice that's sort of very personal, like, I don't know, just be happy, or just invest in something. And it's like, well, that's not really me. You don't really know what to do with their advice. So the psychologists formulated this theory, this distinction, right, that you can be personally wise but not generally wise, or vice versa. And my proposition, and this is where I sort of move a little bit away from the literature and try to see things from my own lens, is that we got to this problem of general versus personal wisdom because we saw the problem in the wrong way. Now, this is where it's important to note that what I'm saying isn't to be taken as a literal statement of how things are in the psychology of wisdom. Rather, I'm hoping you'll go through this material and think critically for yourself, and maybe seek a few other sources about wisdom and sort of make your own mind up. With that in mind, my belief is that wisdom isn't just a system of expertise. You're not just an expert at life when you're wise. Wise people are a little bit more than that. So they have this life experience that they reflect on, and they build on that life experience. But they don't just stop at that. They don't just have that knowledge and they keep it to themselves. Rather, they also are experts at teaching others. Or I should say, they're experts and they teach others to become wiser. That's being a master. So wise people, in my opinion, are rather masters at living, which means that they have that knowledge that I mentioned. They can tolerate the differences in values. They can tolerate uncertainty. And there's one other component that I missed, but we'll leave it at that for now. They have all that, and they apply it in their own life. And they also teach others and they guide others so that they can gain that knowledge for themselves and apply it in their own lives. Now, there's a few different things to be said about that. First of all, when we say knowledge, Knowledge isn't just something sort of vague and out there that you're supposed to, one way or another, gain. And this is why I mentioned in the beginning that it's supposed that old people are wiser. And that's because they have life experiences. Now, these life experiences can be gained through our concrete actions day by day. They can also be gained by reflective practices, so imagining what it would be like to do different things, to run scenarios in our heads. And I don't mean that in a sort of ruminative way. I mean planning and testing out different hypotheses in our minds and sort of watching what happens to ourselves in our minds as we do that, just like we would in real life. There's probably many situations where we consider, for example, lying, and we sort of saw in our minds what sort of consequences that would have, and maybe we decided against it. Or maybe we didn't, who knows? So that life experience is the fertile ground from which to gain knowledge about life. And that knowledge is gained through reflection. So wise people, they reflect on their life experiences day by day, and they perfect their knowledge about life. They're sort of like researchers in a way. Because what researchers do is they have a body of evidence in the literature, and they sort of formulate a theory based on that evidence. Some aspect of psychology is like this. And that's what we do more or less in life as well. We sort of formulate a theory about some aspect of our lives. Like if we got cheated on in a relationship and we're bitter about it, maybe we formulate a theory like all men are dogs, or all women are cheaters, or what have you, right? And regardless of what we might say about that theory itself, it's gained from our life experience. Now, what wise people do is they don't just take it at face value. They say, okay, well, I think this is how life is in this specific domain or aspect or situation. What they do next is they test that hypothesis. So they act as if that knowledge that they have is true. And then this is a very concrete practice that you can try out. So you formulate an idea about life, like what I mentioned, or maybe something else. It doesn't have to be relationships or anything that dramatic like what I mentioned. It can be something simple like, I will feel better in the long run if I get enough sleep every night. That can be a hypothesis, and you test it out. And how do you test it out? You test it out through concrete actions. So you make an action plan about how you're going to act based on that conclusion that you drew from your life experiences so far and what you've learned either from direct experience or from reading. That's also sort of an experience because you're immersed when something interests you. You're immersed in what you're reading or you're watching. So you formulate a theory, then you test it out through your actions, and then what you can do is sort of take a step back and then reflect on what happened. How did you feel before you acted? How did you feel while acting? How did you feel after acting the way you act? Then you can ask yourself, if there were other people around you, how did they seem to react to how you acted? And how do you feel about how you acted and how you felt about acting? It's sort of, we're going meta right now. How do you feel about how you felt? And all of this is meant to teach us how valid that theory that we formulated about life was. So how did I feel before I tried to fix my sleeping schedule? How did I feel while I was while I was fixing it? How did I feel after I had sort of gotten a proper handle on my sleeping schedule? If other people were with me, like a girlfriend, or I don't know, after I woke up and went to work, there were colleagues around me. How did they seem to react to me? And how did I feel about how I felt? Like I felt good, and I feel good that I felt good, something like that. Or I noticed that my colleagues were suddenly more more complimenting me a little bit more because I maybe looked a little bit more rested, or I was less grumpy in the morning. And they noticed that, and I appreciated that they felt that way, and so on and so forth. And all of this is meant to lead us to the final point, which is to formulate an answer about whether or not the hypothesis, the theory that we have, that sleeping, for example, improving our sleep is going to help us, is that still valid after trying it out? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. And it doesn't really have to be a final conclusion. It's a working conclusion, as many things in life are. We sort of have intermediary knowledge about how to act and what life is in some specific aspect. And we build on that and we correct it as we go along. That's what experts do when it comes to living life. And then masters, they go one step further and they try to explain to others what they learned. And in explaining, it's not just that they're sharing with others, they're giving advice to others, they're making recommendation to others. It's that they are perfecting their own understanding of what they learned about life. Because when you have to explain to someone what you learned, that forces you to process your information more deeply. You're forced to make connections between the different pieces of knowledge, and you're forced to articulate that whole knowledge that otherwise would be maybe more abstract or vague in your mind. And that's another important aspect of wisdom. Now, one other thing that I want to bring up, and then we'll move on to the religious and mystical aspects of wisdom, is there's another line of research I mentioned in the beginning, and that's Jung's. And Jung has he does his own thing, basically. And it's important to bring him up in this context because we're tempted to think that maybe, I don't know, wisdom is sort of reserved for someone else, not for me. I've been living foolishly all my life. I have no idea how to become wise. It's other people. They're born wise. They know what to do. They already have things figured out. And, well, maybe we have that sort of belief. But what Jung says is, no, wait a minute. He says, our souls, they have developmental stages, and in the last stage, our soul is the embodiment of wisdom. Now, his theory is sort of like this: the soul is complementary to our sex. That's what Jung says. He says that women have an animus, which is sort of represented symbolically as masculine figures, and men have an anima, which is represented by feminine figures. And the anima in her later stages of development, or in the last stage of development, is embodied by figures like Sophia, which is the goddess of wisdom. Whereas for women, their animus in the last stage of development is represented by a figure like Mercurius, which is the representation of wisdom from a masculine perspective. Or we could say, even though I don't remember any writing of this from him, we could say for women the animus is represented by the figure by the figure of Christ, who is in the Bible described as being wisdom itself. So what does this mean? What does this have to do with our discussion so far? Well, it's meant to point out one important thing. Wisdom isn't external. It's not someone else that's wise, that's maybe teaching me how to be wise. It's something within myself. It's available to me. I can learn from others, of course. I can learn from their experiences, from what they write, from what they say, and so on and so forth. But first and foremost, wisdom is something available to myself. It doesn't matter who I am. It doesn't matter what my background is. It doesn't matter what I did. Wisdom is available to me. And that's important to keep in mind in case you ever get disheartened when you keep on acting foolishly. I have myself, and I keep acting foolishly as well. Not that I set out to do it, but it happens because we're humans, right? We're not perfect. We're not born perfect. It's a process, and that's okay. Now, let's talk about the religious and mystical aspects of wisdom. And this is something that I particularly hold dear. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a theologian or anyone exceedingly well versed in the in spiritual and religious aspects of religion. I'm very much interested in them, but I'm still learning, just like everyone else. Now, starting from where we left off in the psychological discussion, Jung was very much interested in religious experiences, and for him, religious experiences are best understood as fundamental human experiences. Fundamental in the sense that they orient us in how we see the world, in how we interact with the world, and how we see ourselves in the world. So it's something that goes deep into how into our being and into how we understand our being and our role in this world. So one such fundamental experience, for me at least, is from Proverbs. Like I mentioned in the beginning, for me, wisdom is like a sister. And I take that from a Bible passage. It's in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 4, where Solomon advises us. He says this, "Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your acquaintance." So this is a very strange sort of piece of advice. What do you mean treat wisdom like a sister? She's a virtue, she's a concept. It's a concept. Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that, and I'll try to explain a little bit why. So wisdom being treated like a sister is analogous. This is gonna sound silly, I know, but you've done this or you know someone who does this. There's someone out there who has a name for their car or for their guitar or their motorcycle or laptop or what have you. And they treat it as if it's a sort of human being. And that's strange, right? What do you mean you call a car a name and you talk to the car as if it's a woman? Well, silly or trivial as that may seem, it's actually something that comes from within us. I mean it in the sense that that object in front of us doesn't have a life of its own, but when we give the car a name, when we talk to the car, what we're actually doing is we're breathing our own life into that car. We're appreciating something that is ultimately within ourselves. And that makes us change our attitude a little bit towards, let's say, the car, right? The car is no longer just a piece of metal just pieces of metal put together that take us from point A to point B, right? The car is all of a sudden, let's say, Daciuca. This is a Romanian name for a brand of cars that's very well known. And when my car has a name, and when I talk to her, it's no longer just a hunk of metal, right? It's someone dear to me. It's someone that I care about, that I wish well when something goes awry, when something gets broken down. It's not just a replacement part that I'm getting. I'm trying to fix up someone dear to me. I'm trying to help them. And that's a very, well, first of all, it's a more humane approach to treating our objects, but it also helps us take better care of them. And we can say a lot of things about being overly attached to things, and there's definitely something to be said about that. But that's not my point here. My point is, this is a practice that we already do, some of us, and it's not that silly. Actually, it's something that within us that we project onto an object, and we can do the same thing with wisdom, right? If we just treat wisdom as a concept, that doesn't really give us any skin in the game. But once wisdom is our sister, well, all of a sudden, well, maybe I care about what wisdom is doing in a sort of abstract way. Like, how is wisdom manifested in the world around me right now? Well, maybe not so much. Okay, well, maybe I can help with that. Or maybe I feel as if wisdom is trying to tell me something. And when I say trying to tell me something, I mean something like, for example, the voice of conscience, right? Maybe I lie a lot. And I have that sort of voice in my head that says, well, you shouldn't be doing that because that's gonna lead to a lot of trouble. Or maybe you're gonna hurt people in the long run if you keep doing this. And you go like, but I have to say this right now so I'll get away with whatever I'm trying to get away with. And that is, for example, the voice of wisdom trying to talk to us, and we shut it down very conveniently. But once wisdom is a sister that we actually care about and we want to have a good relationship with, all of a sudden things change, right? Our attitude towards those foolish things maybe changes. And even if we still act foolishly, maybe we take a little bit more stock of that foolishness and we try to correct it a little bit more in the future. And that gives us a very practical sort of way of seeking wisdom. So one thing that I do, and this is something that Jordan Peterson recommends, he doesn't really talk about wisdom per se, but it's a good practice towards becoming wiser. So what you can do very concretely every day is, after you wake up, sit at the edge of your bed and then ask yourself, what can I do today that I would do today to have a better relationship with wisdom? And that's a question that you ask as a kind of meditation. You don't give yourself an answer. You don't come up with a list of things to do. You ask the question genuinely wanting to know, and then you let the answers come from within yourself. And when I say you don't give yourself an answer, I say that because it's probably very tempting to, I don't know, maybe I have a list of chores. Well, I should go pick up my medicine, I should go to school, I should take a shower, so on and so forth. But maybe if we let the answer come from within ourselves, what might come up isn't necessarily a specific thing to do, but rather, today I should work on not being so impulsive in what I say. Or maybe another answer that comes up is, I should take better care of myself today. Or maybe another answer, and it can be something concrete as well. Today I should call my mother and see how she is doing. And that doesn't go against our list of chores that we already have necessarily. Sometimes it does, but not always. But what it does is it gives us the opportunity to express ways of becoming wiser that go a little bit deeper than just our own intentional planning, that maybe goes complementary to that planning. And that's a practice that you can do every day. And another practice is, once you're done with the day, at the end of the day, once again, sit a little bit, take a moment and reflect on how the day went. Of the things that I decided that I could do and that I would do today, how did that go? How did I do those things? Did I do them well? Did I do them at all? Did I do quite the contrary? What can I improve tomorrow? What is it that I still need to work on? And what is it that I got right? Because that's important too. It's important to notice when you're doing things right, even if it's something small and you feel like barely significant. That's important to take stock of as well. And all of this, when you have the frame of mind that wisdom is your sister, all of a sudden it's no longer something that you're doing just with yourself. It's sort of a collaboration with the virtue of wisdom. And it's a process, right? It's not something that you arrive at today. You build on it. You maybe suck a little bit tomorrow or today, and that's okay, it happens. But it's important to get up and to try to improve your relationship to wisdom through practices like this. I'm focusing a little bit on the reflective side of things. For me, that's something that we don't really talk about, so I'm trying to bring it up now. But of course, wisdom is most well known through action, through concrete action. And that's important to know, right? So it's not just we're thinking about what to do, we're actually doing things, and then we reflect on how we did those things. That's like life experience that we're building. Now, there's a little bit of a conundrum that I personally have in religious terms, and I'm going to bring it up, even though I don't have an answer. I think it's important to have it brought up. Maybe we can formulate a clearer answer to this. Jung described the self as being the image of God in man. So being ourselves means becoming like God. And this is actually something that many of the church fathers, if you start reading them, will say as well. So Jung's conceptions were, of course, taken from the church fathers and many religious and other sources. And the idea is that we are made in the image of God. So we have that sort of spark of divinity within us. And becoming ourselves means becoming like God. But it's not sort of an egotistical sort of becoming yourself. Yourself is not your ego. And your ego is not yourself. The ego is part of the self. And that's a topic for a different day. But Jung's understanding was that Christ is the best embodiment of that likeness to God. Of course, Christ is God and is fully man and fully human. And that the idea is that our self is in its most perfect manifestation is Christ-like. And that's where we arrive slowly at the problem that I'm mentioning, which is when you read the New Testament and you read descriptions of Christ, he is described when he's young as when he's young, it's said that he is growing in wisdom. He's becoming more and more full of wisdom. And then at one point, it's said about him that he is wisdom. So that's sort of strange, right? Because wisdom is Christ. He becomes so full of wisdom that he is wisdom itself. And then you also have the Old Testament, the Proverbs passage that I mentioned, where it said that wisdom is your sister. So how is wisdom my sister if wisdom is in Christ? And that's a bit of a strange thing for me, but it's a strange thing, just like that. I try to tie it back to what Jung mentioned, that we have souls which in their latest stage of development are best understood through symbols of wisdom. So wisdom seems to be part of the self, of ourselves. And the more we become ourselves, it seems as if the more our souls sort of permeate ourselves and we become more of that wisdom ourselves. And the idea is that we're not just we're called to become fully human, and to be fully human is to have that human nature in ourselves and to also have that divine spark in ourselves, both manifested in our lives. And that's what becoming wisdom is. At least that's what I've been able to understand about this. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm hoping that through this discussion I've sparked your interest in pursuing wisdom, because all of these explanations have served the same purpose, which is describing why it's worth pursuing wisdom. And we have a sort of way of looking at wisdom. We have sort of attitudes that I've described, and we have a couple of practices that I've outlined. None of these are my credit. I'm not taking credit for anything in this particular writing. I'm just piecing together things from very different sources, and hopefully it made sense. If not, I'll try to clarify in later writings and videos. And once again, it's important to get started on and making a commitment to become wiser, to treat wisdom as if it's someone we actually care about and we want to listen to in a more or less practical way. And it's something that's available to all of us within ourselves, and something which we become full of and we become more like as we become ourselves a little bit more. And it's a lifelong journey, right? It's not something that you arrive at one day and that's it, you're done. It's something that you keep working on every single day, because there's new challenges to life. Life isn't over until you die. And until then, you have work to do. And that goes for becoming wiser as well. And we can all be a little bit more wiser in whatever way we need to become wiser.